Welcome to another episode of the Expert Spotlight podcast, where we explore the power of strategic marketing, branding, and business growth. If you're looking to elevate your business, stand out in your industry, and create a lasting impact, you're in the right place. And if you're a busy executive that feels like you're in quicksand a lot of the time, or an entrepreneur who can't seem to keep up with everything, today you're in for a treat. My guest is Bryon Morrison. Bryon is the founder of a company called Proxxy, and Proxxy helps executives become more effective through their executive multiplier program. And I'm sure Bryon will define that for us. Bryon, thanks so much for spending some time with us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Gordon. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
Well, this is an interesting topic, and I know our audience would like to know more, so let's just jump right in. Maybe if you would start by just a quick 60-second background on yourself and what your journey was that led you to starting Proxxy.
Yeah, I originally I spent a lot of time in advertising agencies, and I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I ran businesses, and I just kept running into the same challenges over and over again. And sooner or later, you realize the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and not making any changes. So one of the things that I started recognizing as I was serving on the board of a lot of businesses, and I kept coming into the board meetings, and we would listen to the board come up with great ideas, and it was always that moment where the executive would go, "That's a great idea. I'm going to do that." And then they would leave, and you'd come back the next quarter, and you go, how'd that initiative go? And they'd say, "Yeah, I just couldn't get it off the ground, but we're going to do it." And it becomes one of those initiatives that falls off the leader's list. And so that was it. I just started recognizing, like, it doesn't make sense to keep doing that same thing over and over again. And so we just spent a couple of years deconstructing why does that happen to top executives, and how do you solve it? And so that's kind of where Proxxy came from.
Really interesting. So your ideal clients then are primarily C-suite people, or who do you serve with Proxxy?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We typically work with professional services, small to medium-sized businesses, ranging from employee counts anywhere from, I say 20 to 250 is like an absolute sweet spot, but really anybody under 500 employees. Um, and the folks that we typically serve are CEOs, founders, or executives in that C-suite. And it's usually organizations that have a mindset toward some sort of liquidity strategy. So most of the organizations that we work with are either thinking about acquiring other firms or selling their own firm at some point.
So developing systems is really important if they're thinking of selling, so that the buyer has an idea that the company can continue after the leader leaves.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I would always say that Proxy is we're the best generalists in the room. But when it comes to deep expertise, installing a business operating system, having some consistency and discipline around how the organization works, enterprise metrics, knowing what success looks like, succession planning. How do I identify how to build up my ELT or serve my board and financiers? And then journey mapping, understanding key processes and why they matter and how you can, automate those and make them more efficient. Those are probably our deepest areas of expertise.
So the people that you work with that you would help place in an organization, these are not virtual assistants. These are people who are actually in office helping the executives. Or am I wrong in that?
Yeah, well, so they're not assistants. They're really more like a strategic partner that takes on these key initiatives that I would refer to as on the business versus in the business. So usually what happens is most organizations are moving at a pace where it's really challenging for the executive to get those on the business things secured and consistent. Um, but to answer your question, we are 100% remote. And so we don't staff firms, we are the ones who we hire our proxies, we train our proxies, and then we embed them in the organization. But we continue to they're proxy employees the entire time.
Tell me how you find a proxy employee. I mean, this is a person with a pretty specific experience or skill set to be able to go in and work at that level.
Yeah, in some organizations, in Fortune 500, it's typically referred to as like a chief of staff. And those we find lots of folks who have been in the chief of staff role where it's not misunderstood as like a glorified admin. It's someone who really is the strategic partner to that executive that helps them operationalize their vision. So that's kind of the position that we modeled this proxy concept after. But the challenge with that is that's kind of an island. And so those individuals are often it's very difficult to find the right person. And so what we did was we kind of deconstructed that concept and put a strategist with an integrator to form a perfect union. And so that gives you, the executive, our clients, the ability to have somebody who can help see the forest from the trees, but every day is managing against the major initiatives and executing on those initiatives that are really, really important. And so that's kind of the model that we've created. The benefit to that is it allows us to be able to work with a lot of continuity and not have to, like the executive doesn't have to worry about, well, what happens if, my employee gets hit by the lottery and I lose them? Or what happens if the skill sets required change as I go from 50 people to 150 people? How do I handle that? So that's really what Proxy is perfect for, because we can change out the strategist. You still have the continuity of the integrator. If the integrator changes, you still have the continuity of the strategist. And so it allows you to move at a pace that's much faster than you would be able to on your own.
Listening to you describe those two roles, I would think that that visionary leader that's just got all kinds of ideas and great vision for the future of the company, but can't seem to get stuff done. I mean, your people would be perfect to work alongside them.
Yeah, I used to joke about when I was in Fortune 500, I had a whiteboard that had so much stuff on it that you couldn't erase it anymore. Like it literally, the marker had fused into the whiteboard, and I was like, I cannot operate that way anymore.
You have some interesting case studies on your website about how your company has had an impact. Maybe share one of those with our audience if one comes to mind that you think would be relevant.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's really interesting because we essentially look like management consultants because we work across the entire organization. So it's whatever is really the big challenge for an organization at that time. But one group that we've worked with, they had been constantly going through this rotation of salespeople, and they couldn't get anybody to stay. Poor retention, and you would think to yourself, "Oh, okay, well we're going to hire a good sales leader, and that'll all be fixed." Well, that kept going through rotation also, and what we found is that it wasn't anything necessarily wrong with the sales strategy or the people that they had in place. What was wrong was the organization was not a metrics driven organization. And so they were not managed to those enterprise metrics I was talking about. And then once the salespeople started recognizing there are empirical reasons that you contact a client, or there are empirical reasons that you reach out to someone in a certain number of times. And we started changing their mindset. Well, their salespeople became more successful. And the next step after that was, the CEO said, well, you know, this is great for those guys, but we're not going to be able to hire new ones and keep them because we just know that we don't retain salespeople at the same pace. Now we're at a point where the salespeople stay. That organization's tripled in size. They've done an acquisition because they know that they have a sales and marketing engine that works. So now they can just start growing inorganically. And that's just an example of, not attacking the first thing you see, but understanding the root cause and really fixing the real problem.
It's the old thing in consulting about you ask why 5 different times before you actually get to the real
Five whys.
reason.
That's right. 5 whys. Yep.
Yeah. So interesting. Uh, but it still comes down to really having a good proxy to organization fit. And I would expect that your process then is you and your management team are really trying to understand the organization so that you can identify the correct proxy to go in and be of best service to them.
Yeah, you're right, Gordon. It's what's really interesting is we recognize that how often do you see people where they bring in a consultant and they got to get into every single thing and they end up doing the root canal and anal probe at the exact same time, and it's a horrible experience. So what we've done is we've actually broken that process down into a 6-week, uh, really simple process that puts the onus on the proxy, not on the individual. And we refer to it as speed to trust because each week is methodically planned out so that way we can prove that we are going to come through for you. And so we use tools like, we'll use work style behavior tests and understand how you tick. We understand how you operate and watch you. But like the first week, we onboard ourselves. We ask for certain information, then we come back and say, how close are we? Did we get that right? And then in the next couple of weeks, we start looking for quick wins. What are the things that we can show you how we would take something off the list and show you what our deliverable quality is in our thinking? And then after that, we extend that into the leadership team and we do that work style assessment with a larger group. And then we use a platform that we've created to understand how we meet you where you're at and what initiatives really should be top priority. And then after that, we give you a growth action plan that says, here's how we could work together and the impact we think we could make. And from that point, you could take the plan, you could do it yourself, or what typically happens is we just get started and start knocking things out.
Smiling as you're sharing that, Bryon. I mentioned to you before we started our conversation that I had done some fractional CMO work. It's the exact same process I follow. It takes you a while to figure out what's going on in the organization, but then you need to find a piece of low-hanging fruit to prove your worth, and then things start to move forward more quickly. But yeah, it's that exact same process. Hmm.
Yeah, it's smart. And there's no organization that we work with where the executive doesn't have something on their list that has been frustrating them.
Sure.
And it doesn't mean that you have to resolve and solve that issue. It means you have to show how you think and what the next stages are and how you would brief the executive back after gathering that information. And then you start to understand how each other works. Um, and Gordon, one of the things we established really early on with Proxy is that we would have no long-term contracts. We don't believe in it. So we literally, when we first started out, we were like, let's just go week to week and let's see what happens. I mean, now, everybody's like, look, that's just too much bookkeeping, so let's do month to month. But yeah, we've gotten to a point where we know how to take care of our clients, and our average client tenure is 3.8 years, and we've been around for 5. So um, yeah, so we're pretty good at understanding what the real priorities are and how they should be staged.
You work with companies 50 employees, 250. There's a lot of difference in what's going on in companies over that range. Uh, I would expect that, just thinking out loud, who might really value your service, I would expect if I were an angel investor and I'm putting money into a relatively young company or doing second tier financing, it would be really important for me to know that there were people like your chief of staff that were in that organization helping it move forward. I don't know if that's an
Yeah,
experience you've had, if investors are interested in what you do, and
yeah,
sometimes it's
yeah. Investors, and then also masterminds. We work through a lot of different masterminds where they have great thinking. They know, and they feed that information to these amazing executives. And then it comes down to, yeah, but who's going to actually do that?
work. Yep.
And so, usually the CEO has to go away and go, boy, I'm going to take all that information I just got and I'm going to think about that. And that becomes the bottleneck. And so both of those are perfect examples of like our primary lead sources come from investors, um, board members. We have a tremendous number of board members who come to us and go, hey, I think you could really make a difference for this friend of mine that I'm on their board. And so we get a lot of that. Um, but yeah, I mean, just being able to overcome the issue that, most CEOs go, well, I just got to suffer through this. That's just my lot in life. I'm going to have to just figure this out. And they slave away at it, and they'll try and go make a hire for this strange position that's actually really vital. And so they go, yeah, I'm going to try a president. I'm going to try a COO. I'm going to try all these different roles. And the reality is it's their personal vision that they're trying to implement. And a lot of times it should be somebody who's driving their personal vision and helping operationalize that.
One of the best books I've read in the last couple of years was The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. And one of the things he talks about is, as a chief operating officer or anybody in the C suite, you're so intent on the vision that sometimes you get wrapped up in the weeds and you can't really work forward to implement it. And of course, his prescription is you get away for a half a day every week with your legal pad and turn off everything else, which sounds great. It's not easy to implement. Uh, but, I thought his point was really in line with what you're saying about the people that you help with Proxy. Is, you just
Yeah, I
get,
mean, going back to your case study question, we had one client who I love this. We were talking to them about everything that needed to be done. It was so obvious, and we said, one of the things we're going to do is hire you an admin. And I'll never forget it. He said, "What am I going to do if you take away my email?" And it's just because you're so embedded in it, right? And
yes.
that email flow became his operating system. That's how he viewed the company. And
Mm,
that company went from 25 employees to 75 employees in a year just because it unlocked that kind of thinking. And he's brilliant, but it was the framework that he had worked within.
yeah. So I would expect that you're somewhat niche agnostic. I mean, you can work with manufacturing, you can work with service companies, technical
I
companies.
think leadership is leadership,
Yeah.
Gordon. So I think you're right about that. I will tell you, professional services is where we have done a tremendous amount of work, and that is because people are hard. And so bringing in solutions that have been tried and true and best practices where we've worked with other organizations and we know exactly what we should expect from it, that it works exceptionally well in professional services. But yeah, I mean, we have a pretty wide range of clients.
Really interesting. Thank you for this. I think we've done a pretty good job of sharing with our audience what Proxy does. I want to switch gears and get a little bit more personal and do what we call our lightning round with you, Bryon. I'm going to
Okay.
ask you a question, and all I want you to do is respond with the first thing that comes to mind. Give our
Oh
audience
boy,
to know you a little bit better. So here we go. Coffee or tea?
coffee,
Dogs or cats?
dogs,
What's one business tool that you just don't think you could live without?
business operating system.
Favorite quote or a phrase about success?
Credit belongs to the man in the ring by Teddy Roosevelt.
Yep. Do you have a favorite book on business?
Yes, I have several, but for the sake of your audience, I'm going to suggest I'm going to suggest traction just to get them started.
Okay. What's a bucket list item that you've already accomplished?
Um, uh, Gordon, I've been blessed in so many different ways. You know, I think the biggest thing is being able to live. My wife and I started a nomadic lifestyle a few years ago, and being able to move wherever we want, work wherever we want, and have a business infrastructure that allows us to do that has been that was our plan 5 years ago, and it's worked out pretty well.
That's awesome. Yeah, the flat world that we now have with the internet makes it a much easier lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah.
Last question, Brian. If you could give one piece of business advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Network. Um, Focus on other people and how you can help them in their journey, and it all comes back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Finally, if our listeners want to connect with you, to collaborate or work with you, what's the best way to reach out?
I'm on LinkedIn, and I have this incredibly weird spelling of my name, Bryon Morrison, and so you can search for me on LinkedIn, or you can email me at brian.morrison@proxy.com, or you can just go to proxy.com. That's with two X's.
Yep. We'll make sure those things are in the show notes. Thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us. I think for a lot of our audience that are struggling with how to keep track of what all that has to be done and where to go with their company, this was really helpful. So that's it for this episode of the Expert Spotlight podcast, where each week we talk with business leaders who are making a difference. So until next time, this is Gordon van Wechel wishing you success.